Welcome into the Rocky Top Insider Podcast. I am your host, Ben McKee. Thank you for joining us for another edition of the RTI Podcast. Have a lot to talk about, have a lot to sort through on this wonderful Tuesday evening as the calendar flips over to September 1st. And joining me on this edition of the Rocky Top Insider Podcast is the one and only Eric Cain. For those of you who do not know who Eric Cain is, you can find his work on the radio over at Sports Radio WNML. You can also find him on Rivalry Thursday now that it is football season, and he also contributes to VolQuest as well, churning out recruiting articles left and right, which all the good folks love recruiting. So you can follow Eric's work there, and you can also follow Eric on Twitter @_Cainer. Eric, how are you this evening?
Dude, I'm doing well, man. It feels like it's football time in Tennessee, and just a couple of weeks away from the college season kicking off. We got high school back, and we're 3 weeks into camp, so it's hard to believe. It's almost like you don't want to jinx it, but it feels really, really like it's football time, and so that excites me, my friend.
Absolutely, this is my favorite time of the year, without a doubt. My favorite time of the year because football season is here. Not only is college starting up, but the NFL is starting up. My birthday is next Friday. That's always a good time. And I've reached the point of my life, Eric, to where I don't look forward to my birthday to get gifts like we did when we were kids, but it's fun to go out and eat and hang out with friends. That is kind of what you live for when you get old like us. So birthday, World Series is right around the corner. This year we get NBA playoffs and NHL playoffs. There's a lot going on. So I don't know about you, but this time of year is my favorite.
Now the fall, it's obviously the busiest time of the year, especially for guys like us who cover a team and are on the beat. So it's busy, but it's exciting. You don't get to sleep a whole lot, but it's what you do it for, man. And you're right. You've got not only football, but you have NFL football on Sundays. As you pointed out, NBA playoffs now later in the fall. Major League Baseball is halfway through its abbreviated season. So, for so long there was nothing except for a little NASCAR, a little golf, and now we have everything. And it's awesome, man. It's a great time of the year.
I hate that you brought up NASCAR. I am an undercover NASCAR fan. I've been a NASCAR fan since I was little, since I was younger. My dad was in the Army. And part of being in the Army, you get free tickets to things or discounted tickets. And we lived in North Carolina for 4 years.
NASCAR capital of the world there.
The NASCAR capital of the world. And you can imagine the amount of tickets we got to NASCAR events. I remember going to Charlotte and Martinsville and Darlington and so many tracks. But the reason I'm sour that you brought up NASCAR is because my guy is Jimmy Johnson.
It's a rough way to end it, man.
Bro, you have no idea. And I'm not a bandwagon Jimmy Johnson fan either. Like, I have legit watched NASCAR since I can remember, since I can really remember watching college football. And now that I'm older, I watch it because it takes me back to my childhood, and I still have an appreciation. And there are still guys like Jimmy Johnson racing, although those guys are starting to cycle out. But the first race I ever went to, this was before he won his 7 championships. He won the very first race at Martinsville that I ever went to. And from as a little kid, you see that and you're, I'm going to root for Jimmy Johnson. So to see him not make the playoffs in his final year because of a stupid wreck that wasn't even his fault, just bad luck.
It's NASCAR though, man. It's tough. And yeah, you're certainly not a bandwagon fan because he hadn't had much success in the last couple of years, but those seven titles, man, it's going to be hard to repeat that. Jimmy Johnson's one of the best to ever do it, and I hate that it goes out like that. And I used to watch NASCAR a lot back in the day, and I've kind of gone away from it, but we have a NASCAR show on the weekends on our station, and every now and then they'll ask me to host it just because they need a guy to run the show. And your boy will sit here and prep for like 3 straight days, and I will learn everything about that NASCAR season, and then I'll just stop. And then they'll ask me again like a month or 2 later, and I'll have to do it again. But I like NASCAR, man. There's been a lot of changes with the stage racing and all the rules and all that, with the pre and post inspections and all that. That's been a lot different from when we were younger. But it was really cool this summer to see NASCAR come back, and for a couple of weeks, really, they were doing 2 or 3 races a week, and it was a whole lot of fun. So, I wouldn't say I'm a huge NASCAR fan, but certainly keeping up with it.
Absolutely. I can guarantee you that I did not expect to talk NASCAR
Yeah, same here.
really
Same
really
here.
at all today, but especially here on the RTI podcast. But
Give the
uh,
people what they want, right?
yeah, I'm sure there's some NASCAR fans out there who will appreciate those couple of minutes of NASCAR talk. But for those who are here for the good stuff, the Tennessee football notes and the discussion over the latest Tennessee football developments, and we'll also dive into some recruiting here at the end. But definitely want to dive into the latest news and notes from over the last week or so, and it's kind of been a quiet couple of days, honestly, since Friday. Jeremy Pruitt spoke this evening on Tuesday night. We are recording shortly after, and it wasn't as newsworthy as his press conferences have been over the first couple of weeks of fall camp, and I guess that's why, is because fall camp is kind of in full swing right now, and there's not as many things to talk about. There aren't as many roster notes and things of that nature. But I do want to go back before we dive into some kickoff times that were announced this afternoon. I want to ask Eric his thoughts on the most intriguing position battle in fall camp right now. What has stood out to him the most this fall camp? I know the media is not able to be at practice, and that makes it a little tough to kind of break down what we are seeing, obviously, and hearing. But what is standing out to Eric based off of what Jeremy Pruitt, Jim Chaney, Derek Ansley has relayed to us in media availabilities, as well as a couple of players. So definitely want to get into that. And then, as I mentioned, towards the end of the podcast, dive into some recruiting. Tennessee picked up literally a big commitment on Monday evening in Jamarion Gooch from just down the road at the Kings Academy, and we will discuss that, as well as a Friday announcement that will involve Tennessee as well. Tennessee is a finalist with Alabama and Florida for another offensive lineman, and we will wrap with that. But first, I want to go back to last Friday, which feels like an eternity ago, but just, 5 days ago, even though it feels like a month ago. Deangelo Gibbs, Tennessee's junior wide receiver, a guy that was expected to fill in the shoes of Juwan Jennings and Marquez Callaway and help Josh Palmer form one of the better duo wide receivers in the SEC. He is not going to play in 2020. He has opted out due to concerns involving COVID-19. I know Jeremy Pruitt mentioned that he was going to focus on academics, and that led some to believe that, okay, is Deangelo not taking care of business? Is he not doing what he is supposed to do off the field or even on the field? And Pruitt accidentally alluded to maybe him not handling his business. It is strictly it's strictly concern over COVID. He has had some family issues with COVID, and that is why he has elected to not play this season. But Eric, your thoughts on Deangelo Gibbs opting out, and what do you think that means for guys behind Deangelo Gibbs?
Yeah, so first and foremost, any player this year that chooses to opt out because of COVID concerns, chooses to opt out to couple with the COVID concerns, prepare for an NFL draft. I have no issue with that. I mean, of course, you want college football to be at its best, and this year it's certainly not going to be at its best. With the Big Ten currently not playing, the Pac-12 sitting out, a couple other FBS conferences sitting out, and LSU's roster, Jamar Chase, and a couple other players are opting out and still thinking about opting out. You're kind of seeing it, across the board, some players slowly but surely deciding not to play, and that's their decision, and you got to respect it, and I totally get it. For Deangelo Gibbs, it's a guy that I've been asked since last Friday, how big of a loss is this, and quite frankly, my response has always been kind of like, well, we don't really know, because we don't really know exactly what type of player he was going to be. We've heard great things about him in camp, and we've heard great things about him in practice last year when he was, really just a practice player because he was ineligible to play due to transferring, but how he was giving the defense a lot of run and how he was shining in practice. But it's a guy that played sparingly at defensive back at Georgia, hasn't played a whole lot of college football, and so you didn't really know exactly what you had in Gibbs. And so for that regard, it's kind of a little up in the air. But he's an athletic guy, and he was certainly, with the losses at wide receiver, he was going to get every chance in the world to contribute and to run in the outside, a little bit of inside, and kind of line up all over the place and showcase his athletic ability with Josh Palmer. But he's going to be out now. And the good thing for Tennessee is you have bodies. Just a lot of them are unproven. You got 5 freshman wide receiver that we've heard just great reviews for so far, Ben, during camp from Jim Chaney, from Josh Palmer, from Jeremy Pruitt, from a lot of these coaches and players that we've spoken to about how they're hungry, how they're working hard, how they're preparing and ready to make an immediate impact. They're all Jeremy Pruitt, Jim Chaney rather said they're all fast, they can catch, and they love football. Jeremy Pruitt said they all have soft hands. And so I think we're going to see a number of those guys make a big impact. Particularly, I think we're going to see Jalen Hyatt kind of lead that bunch. Had a fantastic high school career, can stretch the field vertically, will probably line up in that slot position the majority of the time. I think you're going to see a lot of Jalen Hyatt. But it's an opportunity for that whole room outside of Josh Palmer. Brandon Johnson has got something to prove. He came back. He redshirted last year, for this opportunity to come back and try to reclaim kind of what he was doing back in 2017. Brandon Johnson, Cedric Tillman, who's been around for a long time, but never really found consistent snaps. Ramel Keaton, you saw flashes last year, and you hope that he can take a step now as a sophomore. So, Velus Jones Jr. is a guy that also came over this offseason and will look to contribute as well. So Tennessee has the bodies, just not a whole lot of experience behind them. But you do hate it for a guy like Deangelo Gibbs, but you respect him for making that decision.
Absolutely. I think you summed it up the way I would. And I think the really true aspect of what you just mentioned is we don't know yet how big of a loss it is. I think it is a big loss, but there's no proof in the pudding that it is actually a big loss because, like you alluded to, we just have not seen him play yet. And
he could be the best receiver on the team, but we just don't know.
Correct. He was a guy that could have gone out and produced to the point to where he could have made a decision or had a decision to make at the end of the season just based off of his athletic ability and the hype that he generated last season when he was on the scout team. He was a guy that we consistently heard about making highlight reel catches against the first team defense, against Bryce Thompson, who is a future NFL player, against Alontae Taylor, who is getting better and better, and I think will eventually turn into a quality NFL player. So you heard that from Deangelo Gibbs or about Deangelo Gibbs, and you expected him to fill a big void with Juwan Jennings and Marquez Callaway leaving. And I fully expected for Tennessee to have one of the better wide receiver duos in the SEC, as I just mentioned, him and Palmer. But it's a big loss. But I think Tennessee is surprisingly, I don't know if I would have said this a month ago before fall camp, but I think they're going to be okay. Obviously, you want Deangelo Gibbs in the rotation. He might be the best receiver on the team. But you have Josh Palmer, who is one of the better wide receivers in the SEC. You have, and just a quick aside on Josh Palmer, I'll refer to Jason Swain on this one, because obviously the man played the wide receiver position at a high level, and he could be a college wide receivers coach if he wanted to. If anybody listens to Swain break down wide receivers, he could be a college wide receivers coach. He just doesn't want to deal with all the other stuff that comes with being a college coach, as you can definitely understand. But he has maintained the last 2 fall camps prior to this one. I guess when Palmer was entering his sophomore year, and then definitely last year, his junior fall camp, Swain has maintained that he thinks that at the time he thought that Palmer was the one with the most potential, the one that had the most potential in regards to the NFL. And if he wasn't so raw and new and fresh to the position, that he would be Tennessee's best receiver, even more so than Juwan Jennings and Marquez Callaway. I know that's lofty praise, but you definitely see it with his athleticism and kind of how he can do everything. He's more than a one-trick pony, which is what Juwan was and what Marquez was. So Palmer's going to be good. Now, who steps up next to Palmer? That is the next question, and you went through the roster. But, again, I don't think I would have said this a month ago, but based off of how the freshmen have performed to begin fall camp, especially Jalen Hyatt, who might be the starting slot receiver game number 1 against South Carolina, Brandon Johnson has supposedly taken a step forward. You have Velus Jones Jr., who is trying to prove that he is more than just a kick returner.
Yeah.
And Jalen Hyatt has kind of taken the shine away from guys like Cedric Tillman and Ramel Keaton stepping up. And then also his fellow freshman, Jimmy Holiday, has had good reviews. Jimmy Callaway has had good reviews, and so has Malachi Weidman and D. Beckwith as well. You want Deangelo Gibbs, but surprisingly, I think you're going to be able to overcome the loss of Deangelo Gibbs.
I think it's kind of like the defensive line. It's really, strength in numbers. Josh Palmer is ahead of the pack. He's the leader of that group. Brandon Johnson is right below him, but there's not a superstar in that group like there was with like a Juwan Jennings last year, really like a Marquez Callaway as well. There's not a superstar on the defensive line for Tennessee. But as you and I kind of talked about yesterday, and I'm sure we'll allude to on this podcast, there's about 9 guys right now that are in camp that you feel good about just throwing out there, going in there on second or third down for the defensive line. There's about 8 or 9 guys that could be in rotation this fall right now. And that might end up kind of what the wide receiver room is looking like as well. There's not a superstar in the bunch, but you're strength in numbers. And so I think that, like the defensive line, the receiver group could end up being one of the stronger units when it's all said and done. But just got to go out there and seize that opportunity because there's going to be plenty of it to begin the season. And also as well, in Jalen Hyatt, we both believe that a lot of these young receivers, these freshman receivers, will play a lot this year. Jalen Hyatt might start game 1, which is kind of hard to believe. But if he does, Jim Chaney said something last week that kind of stuck with me, saying that he's treating this kind of like he did with Justin Hunter and Derrick Rogers when they were freshmen, throwing a little bit at them at a time. Like, yeah, they'll be out there. They'll know, maybe 60% of the playbook. But when they run a play out of that other 40%, they'll bring them off. And they'll sit them down, and that's when they'll rest. But they'll play only what they know so far, and then little by little, you'll give them more and more and more. And so you might see Jalen Hyatt out there early and often. You might see him not out there in big-time situations, just depending how far along we are in the season. And I think that can be said for freshmen across the board. There's going to be other freshmen that step up and make an impact this season, a couple on the defensive side of the football, and maybe even in the backfield at points in time this season. So I think little by little you'll see these freshmen get more and more and more and more run.
Yeah, and that's the brilliance of Jim Chaney as an offensive coordinator, and why I don't think I can definitively say this because I can't quantify it, but I think Jim Chaney might be the most underrated offensive coordinator in the country. You just don't hear his name talked about as some of the best offensive coordinators in the country. He is often overlooked, in my opinion, when I listen to national college football writers and media members in general speak about offensive coordinators. I never hear Jim Chaney's name brought up, but it should be. But that's the genius of Jim Chaney, what you just described. They're teaching everything to Jalen Hyatt and the other young receivers right now, teaching them everything. And then as the game plan approaches, when game week approaches and it is time to put in that game plan, then they'll have 5, 7, 10, 12 plays, depending on the receiver and how much they can handle. They'll know what they are going to do that Saturday. That way their mind is not racing. That way, if Jalen Hyatt does have to go in on 3rd and 4 and it's a pressure situation, he knows exactly what he has to do because, as you said, it's not in that 40% that was out of the game plan or that they did not go back over. So, and I also think that's the brilliance of T. Martin as well. I don't think T. Martin gets enough credit for how good of a wide receiver coach he is. Everybody talks about his personality and how great of a recruiter he is. I don't think he gets enough credit for how great of a developer of the wide receiver position he is. And the other thing I'll say real quick about the young receivers and replacing Deangelo Gibbs and needing those receivers to have a true immediate impact. And I'll throw Velus Jones in that group as well. Just the newcomers in general, and even throw Cedric Tillman and Ramel Keaton, them needing to step up along with Brandon Johnson and Josh Palmer. The good thing for Tennessee's offense is that you're not going to be relying on them. You're not going to be relying on the passing game maybe as much as you would expect in today's day and age of football, because the strength of the Tennessee offense is going to be the running game. It's going to be lining up behind that offensive line and knocking those defenders back 2, 3, 4 yards and allowing Ty Chandler and Eric Gray, who have both had great fall camps, great off seasons under the guidance of Jay Graham, letting them go to work, letting JG manage the offense and stay within himself. Yeah, you'll need the passing game to produce, obviously, but it's not going to be the strength. It's not going to be do or die with the passing game. So that inexperience can feed off of, the running game, which should be very strong for Tennessee this year.
Yeah, it should. It's kind of weird. Last year you had so many question marks on the offense to where you knew what you had in your receiver game. So, worst comes to worst, you just throw it to Juwan Jennings of the markers and just watch him go. And so it's almost reversed a little bit this year because you had questions of the quarterback position last year, but you were solid at receiver. Now you've got questions at receiver, and I wouldn't say you're solid at quarterback, but you have a veteran that's played a lot of football, now knows the offense second year in, and you're hoping for some consistency. It's almost a little bit reverse in that regard. As far as the run game, I've gotten beat up a little bit, in the offseason when I say this. Tennessee, in my opinion, Tennessee's failed to consistently run the football, really since Jalen Hurd's been here, consistently run the football. You've had flashes. I mean, Ty Chandler had a 154 game against BYU. Eric Gray, obviously, against Vanderbilt.
John Kelly was really good in his year.
Yeah, John Kelly
Enough
was
to
good
get drafted. He didn't have any pieces around him. That performance, sorry to interrupt you just real quick, that performance that John Kelly had against Georgia Tech and Florida at the beginning of the season were two of the best running back performances that we've seen post Philip Fulmer era.
You know what's sad though? The only thing I remember, my takeaway from that Florida game was John Kelly dropping that pass.
Yep.
See, that's football though. That's my takeaway.
Yep.
And but you're right. I did leave out John Kelly, and he was pretty solid in the year that he got an opportunity to play. Really, him being the guy. But
the running game overall wasn't that great that year. John Kelly was great, but the offensive line was, and then as the year progressed, John Kelly didn't have the same effect towards the end of the year that he did at the beginning of the year. So to your overall point, the running game as a whole really hasn't been good since AK and Jalen Hurd.
Yeah, and you hope that it gets back to that. And there's been I thought that hamster Will, goodness.
Oh, Tim Jordan.
He's been off the team for like a month, and I've already forgotten his name.
You mean Buff Hamster, as Wes Rucker loved to call him.
Buff Hamster, yeah. Tim Jordan's had a great performance against West Virginia. Had a good performance on the road against Alabama last year, but just consistently week by week by week. And you hope that Tennessee gets back to that because you've got the talent in the backfield this year to do it. I think Eric Gray is going to be a breakout star in the SEC this year. I think Ty Chandler is not going to be forgotten. I think Ty Chandler is going to finish out strong as well. And if you are, gelling as an offensive line, there are position battles, and we'll talk about that in a second. There are position battles on that offensive line right now, but whoever wins, you feel good about it because – whoever it is, they play a lot of football here for you at Tennessee, or in Cade Mays' case, he's eligible and he's played all over the place at Georgia. You have the opportunity to really solidify a run game, and that will help these young receivers out. So I'm really hoping this year that you don't just have, breakout games spotting around that schedule, that really you're consistent week 1 through week 10. And with an all-SEC schedule this year, you're going to need that run game to control the clock, to open up the passing lanes, take pressure off not only your defense but your young receivers, and really take pressure off Jared Garantano. You hope that he plays more consistent this year and he plays, more confident, which I believe he will. But a run game is helps out so many different areas of the football field, and Tennessee has the backs to do it. And so, consistently getting that out there and being keeping 6 guys in the box and not letting defense get by with not stopping the run with 4 rushers. That's something that's happened in the last couple of years, and you just hope that that's not the case this year.
Yeah, and I don't think you're off base speaking about the Tennessee rushing game because it feels like they were better than what they actually were last season, at least from when you look at it from an analytical standpoint. I think Eric Gray's big game against Vanderbilt and impressive performance against Indiana to end the season, I think that makes the fact that he only rushed for more than 70 yards in one of the other 11 games, I think that makes that fact kind of disappear. And you understand it. That's not a knock on Eric Gray. He was a freshman. He hit a freshman wall and really kind of when he was clicking at the beginning of the season, the rest of the offense was not clicking whatsoever. He looked good in the month of September when he had the ball in his hands. It's just he didn't get a lot of opportunities because, A, JG was playing terrible football. B, the offensive line was not good in the month of September. Everything was just a cluster. So I think people forget that. Eric Gray really only had one good game outside of the Vanderbilt and Indiana.
I'll say this. Against Georgia State, the run game was not there. But what Tennessee did was, and what I really enjoyed, the run game was shut down by Georgia State. Let's move on from that. Tennessee would, run just shallow crosses, would run quick outs, and they would use Ty Chandler and Eric Gray, who finished that game with, I believe, 6 receptions for about 65 yards, and replace those shallow dumps in the passing game as the run game. And that's what you can do with Eric Gray. That's what you can do with Ty Chandler. And so finding ways to impact the game when other parts of your game is shut down, finding more ways to do that. And really outside of that they never used those backs to do that throughout the season. And I wonder why. There was a spurt in 2018 when Tyson Helton, dipped Ty Chandler out of the backfield, ran him straight up the seam in the middle of the field and threw a touchdown pass to him. And
against Georgia.
Yeah. And
Auburn.
Auburn's the one I'm thinking of. And, a couple of times that year, 3 straight games, and then you just haven't seen any more of it. So, why not? And Jim Chaney's smart enough to know to use that. I'm hoping that's, incorporated in the offense more this year with Eric Gray and Ty Chandler because they're athletic enough to do that. And on games when that running game is, halted a little bit, it's kind of tough to come by. You can replace that run game with the short passes to the running backs out of the backfield.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason why they didn't do it as much as they should have or could have is
you
because
had Callaway, Jennings, and
not only that, and you didn't trust your quarterback play.
True.
I think that played a pivotal role in that as well. But I think Tennessee's run game is really going to be able to take pressure off of those young receivers and guys who are having to step up in place of Deangelo Gibbs and Jawan Jennings and Marquez Callaway no longer being there. And you heard Pruitt speak highly of the running back room on Tuesday when he spoke with the media. He was asked about that number 3 running back spot because that is a small concern. If it quickly becomes a big concern if Ty Chandler, if Eric Gray twist an ankle and they have to miss some time, then you all of a sudden are relying on 2 freshmen in Jabari Smalls and T. Hodge.
The reason you saw so much Eric Gray at the beginning of the season was because Tim Jordan was beat up.
Exactly.
Tim Jordan got back to playing, and then you didn't see as much of Eric Gray. But and you're
Tim
right.
Jordan also wasn't also a favorite of the coaching staff, not because of him personally, but he doesn't have a ton of wiggle. He really doesn't. He's a guy that will pick up 3, 4, 5 yards, and he'll play hard. And he was good in pass protection, but he wasn't the favorite out of the bunch. Again, not because of him personally, but because he did not have a ton of wiggle. But I think the running back room will be strong even with his absence because I think Jabari Smalls and T. Hodge will be able to contribute fairly well for freshmen. You don't want to have to rely on them to be the premier back, but a number 3 option or a backup to Ty Chandler or Eric Gray, if one of those go down, I think they're capable of doing that. And you also heard, surprisingly, Jeremy Pruitt speak highly of Fred Orr, the walk-on running back who we have seen at different times last year. So I think the running game will definitely be able to take pressure off of the loss of Deangelo Gibbs and Jarrett Garantano as well.
Question for you real quick, Ben. Are we going to see a running back carry the football on 3rd and short, 4th and short, 4th and goal, 3rd and goal? Are we going to see a running back carry the football, or are we going to see a linebacker with a bad shoulder who hasn't played running back in 2 years carry the football? Because I feel like now –
which one? There's 2 of those linebackers.
Yeah, with T. Hodge and with Lenneth Whitehead, you have a bigger body running back for that situation. Now, will they get the green light to do that right out of the gate? Probably not, but you hope, at least I hope, as the season goes on, that role can shift out of the hands of Quavaris Crouch into the hands of a T. Hodge or Lenneth Whitehead.
I doubt we'll see Lenneth Whitehead this year. He is dealing with a foot injury that cost them a bunch of his senior season. So I would be surprised if we see Laneith Whitehead, especially at the beginning of the year. I think there's 0% chance we see Laneith Whitehead at the beginning of the season. And the plan was to redshirt him before the free year of eligibility. If he's able to play at the end of the season, do you throw him in there if the opportunity presents itself? But by that point, I think T. Hodge will have established himself. T. Hodge isn't your – I don't think he's your – when you think of these short yardage backs, or at least I do, I think of Lindell White. I think of a Jabari Davis, a Jerome Bettis, like these huge bruising backs. And T. Hodge is bigger than Ty Chandler and Eric Gray, but I don't know if he's that, you know. But I still think he will be able to pick up, and especially with the help of the offensive line. That is really why I feel confident in T. Hodge being able to be successful in those short yardage situations. If they do choose to go to T. Hodge in those situations, I think the offensive line will really help him be able to be efficient in those situations. I don't know how big T. Hodge is at the moment. I don't think he's as big as maybe people think he is, but I do think he will get at least
235. I don't think he's 235.
Yeah, he'll get the first stab at short yardage situations against South Carolina, against Missouri week 1 and week 2. And if he's successful, there you go. If he's not, then I do think you start to see the coaching staff tinker with Kavaris Crouch and Jeremy Banks coming over and playing in those short yardage situations.
He's just somebody that's Jeremy Banks as well. I mean, that's a guy you can put in there if he can hang on to the football. I just feel like getting a guy in there that's not 200 pounds would be better. Hey, sidebar, real talk though. When I was growing up, my favorite running back was Jabari Davis, and it's so funny seeing him now as an adult on Twitter. Hilarious. And I know that you talk to him all the time.
Jabari's my guy.
Let him know that your boy over here, your boy, you were my boy's boy back in the day. I loved when he came into the goal line and would jump over the line. That was man. That was my childhood memories right there.
The Gator Killer.
Yeah.
Yes, I love Jabari. Jabari has a great heart, great personality, and he's hilarious. He's even more funny than he comes off on Twitter. He's like too funny. He's funny to the point to where he gets himself in trouble. That's how funny he is.
Yeah,
and
I can see that.
Yeah, him and Swain, you put them in a room together, and it's something else. But speaking of that South Carolina and Missouri game, those kickoff times were announced today. Don't want to spend a ton of time on it because I don't think kickoff times really matter in the grand scheme of things. They're fun to talk about and fun from a fan perspective to plan out your Saturday. But it was announced that Tennessee, South Carolina will kick off at 7:30 p.m. Eastern on the SEC Network week 1, and then Tennessee's home opener against Missouri will be a noon kickoff on the SEC Network. You also had 2 other games announced. The Kentucky game, which is week 4 and sandwiched in between Georgia and Alabama. That game, there's 3 options, 12 o'clock, 3:30, or 4. So however the first month of the season goes will determine that kickoff time. And then the Arkansas game was announced. The Arkansas game is week 7, I believe. It is November 4th, 5th, somewhere in there. The week after the bye game, the week after Halloween.
November 7th.
Thank you. The week after Halloween, because Tennessee's bye week is on Halloween. But that game will kick off at 7:30 as well. My general thought on the kickoff times is they don't matter this year because there will be very limited fans in the stands.
Yeah, I agree as well. Do we know? I'm trying to look for it right now. Did CBS put out the 3:30 kick for that week 4 matchup? Because could that be Tennessee, Kentucky? I know they put out some.
No.
Okay.
I don't know if they did put out that week's SEC on CBS game, but I know it won't be Tennessee, Kentucky because the reason they announced Tennessee, Kentucky at 12, 3:30, or 4 is because it will be on one of the ESPN channels.
Oh yeah, that's right. I get them all mixed up, but
I do too. So
nonetheless, I mean, yeah, it's kind of what you'd expect. You knew Missouri was going to be not a good time slot because it's Tennessee, Missouri. Blah. Gamecocks under the lights in Columbia, that'll be fun. So I'm as well in terms of night games and all that. It's just kind of it is what it is. It doesn't mean a whole lot for me this year because there won't be as many fans in the stands to make that much of a difference.
Right. Yeah, I'm with you. So that was released on Tuesday afternoon, and there wasn't a whole lot to take away from Pruitt's press conference on Tuesday. There was a lot of events over the weekend. Friday's practice was canceled because there was a string of positive COVID tests within the building last week. But then Tennessee returns to practice on Saturday after their march on campus. And that was after they did a round of testing Friday morning after they found some positive tests. So that appeared to work itself out. And then there hasn't been much news since then. And again, not a lot came from his press conference on Tuesday. Honestly, the thing that stood out to me the most was a quote when asked about if this year's national championship is something that Tennessee is truly playing for. And Jeremy Pruitt said, absolutely. We can't control who's playing this year. So that was what stood out to me, along with some position battles at running back. He alluded to a lot of competition at offensive tackle, a lot of competition in the secondary at safety, which I thought it was neat how he talked about how, in his opinion, Tennessee has not produced enough turnovers on the back end. And that is something that they are really striving for. And they are looking for safeties who can not only, make up a lot of ground in the secondary, but also guys who can be erasers back there. So that was kind of what stood out to me. Did anything stand out to you from Tuesday evening's press conference?
Yeah, Jeremy Pruitt's always saying how they need to be more aggressive and create more turnovers. That's been kind of a theme that he's been preaching on since he's been here, and he always will. I mean, he's a defensive coordinator. He's a secondary coach, and so he's always going to preach on that. But what Tennessee's done since Jeremy Pruitt's been here, the roster's completely, been made up. It's a much better roster. They have started creating turnovers more and more, little by little, from year 2 to year 1. So that's fun to see, and you hope that it continues this year. The biggest thing for me was when asked about contingency plans for if COVID strikes a position group or if COVID strikes a member of the coaching staff. Kind of what's the plan there? And, as far as coaching staff, say Jim Chaney was out for 1 week. He said, we've got guys, Will Friend, T. Martin, those guys can call offensive plays. On defense, they can all call them. If DA's out, then, of course, JP can step in and call it like he did in year 1. Other guys can step in and call the defensive play calls as well. But, for a position group, and I was talking to Vince and John Wilkerson on Sports Talk about it after the press conference. Tennessee already trains as if COVID was here. What that means by it, Tennessee cross trains. You've got right tackles repping at left guard. You've got left tackles, repping at right guard. You've got right side of the offensive lineman flipping with their guard tackle combo. Tennessee cross trains and always has. So, and that's a big thing because, whoever loses the right tackle position very well may play guard if Cain Mays is unavailable. And you have all these options, and that's a good thing. So, if COVID were to hit the offensive line, you have so many more options than strictly who is just number 2 on the depth chart, who is number 3 on the depth chart. In the back end, Keyshawn Lawrence is going to be a guy that will know how to play all 5 of those spots. Bryce Thompson can play all over the place if you want him to. You already have Trayvon Flower and Jalen McCullough flipping positions, so they can play the other position. Theo Jackson can play both. Jeremy Pruitt, as far as linebackers are concerned, Jeremy Pruitt recruits 4-4 guys, meaning they can play all 4 linebacker spots. If it came down to it, J.J. Peterson's on the outside. He can go back to the inside. Quavaris Crouch has already played outside. You don't want to move Henry T by any means, but I'm sure he'd be fine on the outside as well. Tennessee trains to where you've got guys that can play multiple positions. So if COVID does hit a position group, I think you're going to be okay. And so that's a good thing. And that's something that sticks out to me. And this is something, again, very pre-COVID. This is just how Jeremy Pruitt operates. And I think that's the sign of a smart football coach. I like the way he goes about it. But in a year like this where very easily you could lose a starter here and there, you could be down a couple players each and every week. You have guys that have trained at that position that can be ready to step up and fill in.
Yeah, no doubt about it. You saw late last week LSU's offensive line go down because several players tested positive for COVID or came in contact with somebody who had tested positive. And they were down to 4 offensive linemen in one practice. And that is obviously a nightmare scenario. And as you just talked about, Jeremy Pruitt did speak on Tuesday about contingency plans for if that were to happen to a room. And thank goodness, from a Tennessee football perspective, thank goodness this is taking place in 2020, year 3 of Jeremy Pruitt, than year 1 of Jeremy Pruitt. They have the depth at most positions to overcome a room being wiped out.
Jeremy Pruitt's first spring, he didn't have enough linemen to go 2 spot.
Yeah, imagine having that on top of COVID. That would Aubrey Solomon would be your starting center. That would not be fun to watch. But it definitely seems like Tennessee, depending on the situation, obviously, and if Henry To'oTo'o and Kavaris Crouch goes down and you have to play Solon Page and you have to slide J.J. Peterson back over to inside linebacker, that would not be ideal. So it does depend on the situation, but it seems like the way Tennessee practices, they'll be somewhat okay, better than most, to handle that situation. To look back at fall camp in general and what we've heard Jeremy Pruitt speak about during these first 2.5 weeks of fall camp, what has stood out to you the most? I know for me, real quick, it's been the quarterback situation. Obviously, it's been that Jarrett Guarantano is quietly, people aren't talking about it enough, in my opinion, because people aren't as big Jarrett Guarantano fans. And look, I get it. There's JG fatigue, and I understand where that fatigue comes from. But JG is having a really good fall camp. He's making good decisions. He is getting the ball out on time. He is going through his progressions correctly. And look, I get that it's practice. I get that it's fall camp, and let's do it against South Carolina, Missouri, and then Georgia, week 3. Let's do it then. But even last year and the year before, you weren't hearing coaches talk about JG properly going through his progressions, properly throwing to the right wide receiver. Say that 5 times fast. Right wide receiver, and being on time with the ball and being accurate with the ball. Jeremy Pruitt openly spoke about how well JG has performed in practice, and you had to pull teeth to get Jeremy Pruitt to say something positive about JG when Pruitt first got here. And you heard Jim Chaney also talk about how he was very pleased with Jarrett Guarantano. And then JT Shrout, his emergence as the number 2 quarterback, that has been surprising to me. He's taking better care of the football, and he's always had the arm. It's just always been in between the ears with JT Shrout, as it is with all of Tennessee's quarterbacks except Harrison Bailey. Last year, JT Shrout couldn't not have back-to-back false starts in practice because he was calling the wrong protection or sending the wrong person in motion and then snapping the ball while the person is in motion. Just a lot of cluster, you-know-what, when he was in charge during practice. But he's fixed those mistakes, and he's the number 2 quarterback right now. And then Harrison Bailey, Jeremy Pruitt used the word he shined in a recent practice with his decision-making and his ability to take care of the football. So that has been surprising. And then the development of Eric Gray and Ty Chandler, the fact that they've been real professional in how they're practicing and their approach is what Jim Chaney said. And you've heard behind the scenes how big of a deal Jay Graham has been for them and just fixing little things, little details here and there to help them really take that next step. So those are a couple of things that has really stood out to me during these first 2.5 weeks.
Typical media just paying attention to the offense, you know?
I'm an offensive guy. Sue me for it.
The story of camp has been the wide receivers, the young wide receivers. Who will step up? How much of an impact will they play? Who's going to help Josh Palmer? So to me, the story of camp so far has been the wide receiver room, and so it's been fun talking about that. And I agree with you. I'm hearing good things about Jerry Guarantano, and it's kind of weird, publicly during these Zoom press conferences. The only time JT Shrout, to my knowledge, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the only time JT Shrout's been talked about really has been when we've asked about JT Shrout. Yep. And, there's been questions asked about JT Shrout, but it's good to know that he's having a fall camp because you saw him come in, you saw he had the arm, and it's just, well, why doesn't this guy play as much as he does? But, football is 90%, between the years. And so you're hoping that he continues to progress. And the whole, where's Harrison Bailey? How much has he shined? Is he starting yet? You and I both agree. Harrison Bailey's not going to be starting game 1. That is for sure. Missed all of spring. missed the first week of camp. He's just too far behind right now, and you shouldn't expect him to make that type of jump right now, especially as a true freshman.
Nobody would be if Jarrett Garantano fatigue did not exist.
Yeah, and you're probably right. Will Harrison Bailey see the field this year? Probably. I hope so. I mean, especially in the year that it doesn't matter for eligibility purposes. I think you will. Will he be the first one to come in if Garantano struggles or gets hurt right now, immediately? Probably not. But it'll be fun just to kind of tool around and watch how that progression works. But for me, story of camp's been wide receiver. Obviously quarterbacks a little bit. That's what makes everything tick. And I will say this, man, slowly but surely, this defense, what you think about, you return 8 of 11 starters. You return pretty much everybody. But the three you miss are second-round pick Darrell Taylor, the guy that led the team in tackles the last 3 years, currently on an NFL roster. That's Daniel Batuli, an all-SEC performer and fighting for a Baltimore Ravens depth chart spot, Nigel Warrior. Those are 3 very, very, very much impact players. And so it's going to be tough to replace those guys. And, how will Tennessee replace those guys, especially, at the edge and linebacker position? That's going to be huge for Tennessee because I think the Vols will be okay in the back end to make up for Warrior. I think that they're going to be okay in the front four-ish. But replacing Darrell Taylor and really replacing Daniel Batuli, huge question marks going forward, again, especially Batuli. And we'll be interested to see how Quavaris Crouch, Jeremy Banks, and maybe some of these 2 of the Whitehaven trio and Bryson East and Martavis French, maybe they can make a push to add some depth purposes. So we're in the middle of week 3 of fall camp. Wish we could be there, man. I hate not being there. It drives me insane. It's like I got an itch right here I got to scratch. But if it means that we can have a fall football season, I think we're all make that sacrifice.
Absolutely. And you've heard positive things about guys stepping up at those positions that you just mentioned, especially the newcomers. Morven Joseph is a guy that is having a strong camp and is impressing early on at that outside linebacker, edge rusher, whatever you want to call him. Quavaris Crouch has responded well to shoulder surgery and is really, coming into a good understanding of the defense and what he needs to do. I think he's going to be a really nice piece next to Henry To'oTo'o. And I think Jeremy Banks is right behind Quavaris Crouch. I think Tennessee, by the end of the season, going into next year, 3 really good options at inside backer with Henry T, Banks, and Crouch. I think
at that point, sorry to cut you off, if you get to that point, then if you have 3 guys or, one guy, the best one, and then 2 guys playing at the same level, if you have 3 guys for 2 spots, you could very easily see Quavaris Crouch or J.J. Peterson play outside, shift inside. You saw Jeremy Pruitt do a lot of that at Alabama, take his edge guy, put him on the inside. And so that could happen down the line. And you're right. I think Jeremy Banks is pushing Quavaris Crouch. I think he'll play a lot this year. And so that's the position you want to be in, especially towards the end of the season heading into next year.
Real quick before we wrap up with recruiting, your most intriguing position battle right now from what you have gathered, Jeremy Pruitt speaking about, and just your perception of what is going on during fall camp?
Yeah, it's those offensive tackle battles. If all things went according to plan, you'd have Wanya Morris and Darnell Wright out there starting. They are the better athletes. They are they're stronger. They have the athletic ability. But Jameer Johnson, we've talked about it off the air, is coming in or off the podcast rather, coming in, now in his senior year, and he knows that he doesn't get to play football forever, and he's coming in with that mindset. And he's worked really hard. He's pushing Wanya Morris there at left tackle. And Kayron Calvert, that was going to be the story of spring. Wanya Morris was out there in spring, was supposed to be. It was going to be all about Kayron Calvert and Darnell Wright. And we didn't get to see that battle in spring. And so seeing that battle or hearing about that battle in camp and seeing which one wins, because, again, the loser of that could very well play that right guard spot if Cade Mays is ineligible. So it's about how those tackles end up, who wins those starting gigs, and what happens with Cade Mays for me in terms of eligibility. Because if you take Cade out there, you're okay. You've got guys to fill in, but it kind of does shuffle some things around. And, again, Cade Mays is a guy, too, that let's not forget, if Wanya Morris was to go down and, say they weren't comfortable with Jameer Johnson, you could slide Cade Mays over their left tackle. at right tackle. Cade Mays could snap the football. He's not going to be the backup center, but he can snap the football. Cade Mays can play all 5 positions on the offensive line, and that's so valuable, especially for a Jeremy Pruitt coach, Will Friend coach offensive line. So my most intriguing position battle is those 2 tackles on the offensive line.
Yeah, the emergence of Jameer Johnson has surprised me. I quite honestly had written him off.
Yeah, in 2018, he played a lot of games, but he was, weighing about 270. He was so slim. He was getting stupid penalties. I think he got ejected from a ball game.
I think you're right.
And he's put on some weight, and it's about time because, again, he's always had the athletic ability. It's just been about, making it work, but, showing it on tape. And I like that. And this is a good position to be in too. You don't ever – I mean, if you're a competitor, you never want to lose your starting spot, but being pushed brings out the best in everybody. And so having 8 offensive linemen you feel confident about to play 5 spots, you feel great about that.
No doubt about it. My position would be the backup quarterback spot and the battle at safety. JT Shrout's emergence has surprised me just based off of his inability to grasp the offense last year. It seems like he has done a complete 180. And then Harrison Bailey, even without spring, without a traditional summer, while spending the first week of camp in social quarantine, he's been able to still be impressive. So that backup quarterback spot, which I think is JT Shrout and Harrison Bailey, even over Brian Maurer. Brian Maurer is just too inconsistent, needs to take that jump that JT Shrout took. And it's not surprising that JT Shrout took it before Brian Maurer. JT Shrout's a year older, and I think the hope there is that Brian Maurer can do what JT Shrout did this past offseason. So the backup quarterback spot and the secondary, really the entire secondary, because Warren Burrell and Kenneth George Jr. are having good camps, but mainly the safety position because you have Trayvon Flowers, you have Jalen McCullough, but Danico Slaughter and Key Lawrence, they have been very, very impressive. So I will be curious to see if those 2 freshmen can push for a starting position. I think they're going to play a ton. They are guys that can play multiple positions in the secondary. So those are kind of the 2 position battles that are most intriguing to me at the moment. Before we get out of here, I want to touch on recruiting because it has been a good 24 hours for Tennessee in recruiting. Tennessee picked up a commitment from Jamarian Gooch, who is just down the road at the Kings Academy in Seymour, Tennessee, probably 30 minutes from campus. He had been committed to Auburn since April. 6'7.5", 358 pounds, flips from Auburn to Kentucky, and he's not rated highly, Cainer, by the 247 Sports Composite. He's the number 790 overall player in the country, but I can assure you that he will outplay that ranking for 2 reasons. One, he was committed to Auburn. That's the only validation on top of Tennessee's assessment of Jamarian Gooch that I need. Auburn has a great track record of offensive linemen under Gus Malzahn. They have taken multiple guys and developed them and turned them into NFL players, quite frankly. So that makes me feel good. You would expect for a guy who is ranked that low not to have those type of offers, but he does. And the reason he's not ranked highly is because he has not been able to go to camps because of COVID, and he wasn't able to attend a ton of camps last off season as well. And the other reason I'm confident that he can be a good player for Tennessee down the road, not an immediate impact player because he has a ton of developing to do, but he's only started 13 games on the offensive line in high school. He's very raw, but very athletic for somebody who is 6'7", 350, and somebody that size should not move as well as he does.
Yeah, he's a developmental player. And so, when he sets foot on campus, you'll have Wanya Morris and Darnell Wright being juniors. And so you don't have to rush Gooch into playing.
Sophomores, free year of eligibility.
There you go. Yeah, sophomores. I forgot about that.
But they're still – Wanya Morris is still probably a 3-year player. Even though he'll –
yeah. But anyway, you don't have to rush Gooch into playing time. You can sit back. You can let your body transform from high school to an SEC football player's body. You can sit back and learn and watch and be patient because right now he looks like he's a big kid, but he looks like a high schooler. He'll need to get in a proper nutrition system and the weight room and all that stuff too, which he will. But you can't coach size. 6'7.5", about 360. He plays straight up right now. Can't do that in college football. He'll learn. But a lot of his highlight tape I watch is him playing defense at D tackle, also standing up in a 2-point stance, coming off the edge. He is quick. He's got good feet, just overpowers people at his level. And, he's a 3-star per Rivals. And, he might not be highly rated, but a developmental player that could turn into something down the road. And plus, it's not to mention, he's a local kid too. So, yeah, he played in the mid-state before transferring to the Kings Academy, but you don't ever want to let guys inside your state borders get out. And I think Gooch could be a guy that could help down the road. And so I think this was a really good get. And I'll be brief here, but I want to say too, more so this is important because it was the second offensive line commit. And now Tennessee is still after a couple, and they're still going to be going hard, and the numbers will work themselves out sooner or later, as they always do. But you don't need to dare dooley this. This has been a really good recruiting class. You need to bring in at least 2 or 3 offensive linemen every single year. Must. And Gooch is now the second pledge for the offensive line class in this 2021 class. And so, to me, that was more important than anything, is that they got another offensive lineman because they need them.
Yeah, no doubt. And as you mentioned, Tennessee is still after several offensive linemen. You look at William Parker, who is announcing this Friday. You look at Rod Orr, the offensive lineman from North Alabama. You look at Amarius Mims. Obviously, that is the big fish that Tennessee really wants. I think if Tennessee can land all of those offensive linemen, they will take them all, including Jamarion Gooch. I know that's a lot of offensive linemen, but Jeremy Pruitt understands the importance of winning the line of scrimmage in the SEC. And so he would be willing to sacrifice other areas of the football team. Not significantly sacrifice in other areas in recruiting, but be willing to take away a spot from a position to add an offensive lineman. And I think that also applies to the defensive line and at edge rusher as well. But don't worry about offensive line recruiting. If Tennessee wants all of those guys that we just mentioned, and if they can get all of those guys, they will bring all of those guys in. So as you said, Cain, the numbers will work themselves out. It'll just be in other areas, and we'll see how it all plays out. But William Parker, the kid who is announcing on Friday, another guy that really fits the same mold as Jamarion Gooch to me in the terms of he is significantly underrated. And it's not for anything other than the fact that Nick Saban and Alabama legitimately want William Parker. That's all I need to know. That is all I need to know. Georgia was in the conversation at one point. Florida is probably finishing third. Auburn is in the conversation. I don't need to know their ranking. I don't need to know, how many stars they have. All I need to know is that those were legitimate offers. And if it weren't for Alabama being on the verge of signing probably the greatest offensive line class anybody has ever seen, William Parker might be headed to Alabama. Who knows? We'll see what he decides to do on Friday. I think Tennessee is in a good position for William Parker, but he kind of fits that same mold to me, that he's just a big, bruising, mauling offensive lineman who will absolutely outplay his ranking. And to kind of go back to what you were speaking on with Gooch and not needing him to come in and play right away, that applies to William Parker as well. And that speaks to the health of the Tennessee football program and the fact that you're no longer in a position to where you have to have these guys come in and play right away.
Do we remember the end of the 2017 season?
No, I deleted it from my memory.
There was a walk-on tight end that was playing offensive tackle. I mean, come on, that again, you've got to recruit offensive linemen every single year. And so, to your point, if all these guys want to come to Tennessee, Tennessee will gladly take them. William Griffin Parker, another guy in state from Pearl Cone High School out there in the Nashville area, the 12th ranked prospect per Rivals in the state of Tennessee, 6'5", a little over 300 bills. He's 3 bills. He's a little bit. He's not as hefty as Gooch is, but again, a decently sized offensive tackle that can come in here and if he were to choose Tennessee, come in here and develop as well. And so, I've talked to Rod Orr as well. he's high on Tennessee, loves Tennessee, and he'll make his decision, sooner or later. But
real quick on Rod Orr, keep him in your thoughts and prayers. Just everybody listening, because if you saw the news cycle 2 or 3 weeks ago, you saw a UAB. I don't know what position he played. I think he was a freshman, but a UAB football player died. He passed away because of an accidental shooting, and Rod Orr was present for that when that took place. It was one of his good buddies who died of an accidental shooting, and he has kind of taken a step back from recruiting at this point because of that situation. So I wouldn't expect I wouldn't expect Rod Orr to do anything anytime soon because of that. He's very high on Tennessee, as he's high on other schools, but just keep that young man in your thoughts and prayers. I couldn't imagine going through that at any age, but especially as a senior in high school.
Yeah, and he's a good kid too. I've talked to him a couple times, wrote a couple stories on him. He's excited about his future, and so anytime you have to go through a situation like that, you're exactly right. Thoughts and prayers for Rod Orr in that situation. I will say this, not to take away from what we're talking about at hand, though. When it comes to recruiting for Rod Orr, something Tennessee has in its back pocket, Rock Taylor, that's his cousin. So that could be a factor down the line. So bringing all this to a head, Tennessee's got 25 commits right now, only 2 offensive line pledges. They're still going after some linebackers. Tennessee will take who they want to take, and the numbers will work themselves out.
Always do.
You might see 20, or you might see 28 or 29 commits. It don't matter until who signs, and so they'll all work themselves out.
Absolutely, it does every year. Eric Cain, Eric, I have kept you way too long, as I knew this would happen. I think I even told you this before we started recording. Whenever you and I speak, it is always for too long. We get going, and we love chopping it up about Tennessee football and sports in general. So I appreciate your time.
One day we're not only gonna work together, but we're gonna have our own podcast / radio show. It's gonna happen one day. So this was the start of something great.
That is correct. And I want to kidnap you every week to have you on, but we'll have to figure that out. We'll definitely have you back on before the season opener against South Carolina. How can people follow you and follow your work?
Yeah, best way, just follow me on Twitter. That's @_Cainer. I've got a link to my very own podcast. I tweet out all my articles that I contribute to VolQuest in terms of recruiting. I'll have a couple going up here in the coming days as well. I've got all my audio from The Sports Animal when I host shows, and best way to follow me is @_Cainer on Twitter, and I appreciate it.
Absolutely. That is Eric Cain. Always appreciate the wealth of knowledge that he brings. Follow him on Twitter @_Cainer. What's that?
So much knowledge.
More knowledge than anybody. Something's got to fill that big head. No, I'm kidding. I'm confident and comfortable saying that because I have a big head.
So you have the right to say it. Yeah.
Exactly. So I can make fun of other people's big head. And at least you have hair. You have good hair. Mine's gone away. I blame Butch Jones and Derek Dooley, but whatever. All right. I'm Ben McKee. This has been the latest edition of the Rocky Top Insider Podcast. Again, follow Eric Cain on Twitter. He will be back, and we will be back later this week working on a recruiting podcast prior to William Parker announcing on Friday, and Jeremy Pruitt will speak again on Saturday, but we will speak to assistant coaches on Wednesday, players on Thursday, and then Jeremy Pruitt on Saturday. I believe that is the schedule that was sent out for the week. So always appreciate your ears. Leave us a rating and a review on Apple, on iTunes. And until next time, we'll catch you later.